My daughter stood in my living room with my bank folder tucked under her arm like it already belonged to her, in front of my sister, my nephew, and two neighbors who had come to check on me after my wife's funeral. Emily smiled and said, "Dad, you too old to understand money. Just let me handle what's left." What she did not know was that I had already seen the missing withdrawals. My name is Robert Ellis. I am 74 years old, and I spent 42 of those years married to a woman named Helen, who could make a house feel warm even in the middle of a Pennsylvania winter. We lived in a modest brick home outside Pittsburgh, the kind with a narrow driveway, a maple tree near the curb, and a kitchen window that looked out over a small backyard full of tomato plants every summer. Helen was not loud. She did not need to be. She remembered everyone's birthday, kept handwritten recipes in a yellow folder, and believed that a family should never leave a table angry. I was a high school shop teacher for 36 years. I taught teenagers how to measure twice, cut once, fix what they broke, and stand behind their work. Helen worked at a local clinic, first as a receptionist, then as the woman everyone went to when they needed kindness more than paperwork. We never had much money at once. What we had was built slowly. Every paycheck had a place. Mortgage, groceries, gas, Emily's school clothes, piano lessons she quit after 6 months, braces, college applications, her first used car later when she married Mark. Helen and I paid for the reception. Because Emily cried and said she had always dreamed of a proper wedding, I cashed out an old savings bond that my father had left me. Helen sold a bracelet her mother gave her. We told Emily not to worry about it. Parents say that when they want their children to enjoy something without seeing the cost. When Helen got sick, everything changed except my duty. I drove her to appointments, learned the names of medications, slept in a chair beside her when the hospital would not give me another blanket, and sold my old woodworking tools to cover what insurance did not. Emily visited when she could, but she always seemed hurried. She had meetings, errands, stress, plans. Helen defended her until the end. She said our daughter loved us, but life had made her restless. After Helen died, the house felt too large. Her slippers still sat beside the bed. Her reading glasses were on the nightstand. Her sweater hung over the back of a kitchen chair. I did not move those things because grief has its own clock and no one has the right to rush it. So when Emily offered to help me with bills, I felt grateful. I thought she was finally stepping closer. I thought my daughter had come back to me when I needed her most. I gave her limited online access to help organize utilities, medical bills, and funeral expenses. I gave it because I trusted her. I gave it because she was my child. I gave it because I still believed the family Helen and I built was stronger than money. That belief nearly cost me everything. The first warning did not feel like a warning. It felt like confusion. A month after Helen's funeral, I received a late notice from the electric company. I stared at it for a long time because Helen and I had never paid a bill late in our lives. Even during the hard years, even when the refrigerator broke the same week, Emily needed tuition money. Helen always made sure the lights were paid first. When I called Emily, she told me not to worry. She said the online payment probably had not processed. She sounded annoyed, as if the late notice were my fault for noticing it. Then the water bill came with a red stamp. Then my supplemental insurance payment failed. Then a credit card I kept only for emergencies showed a balance I did not recognize. None of the amounts were enormous at first. That was what made them easy to explain away, a few $100s here and a payment transfer there. Emily said automatic billing was messy. She said older people got overwhelmed by digital banking. She said she had everything under control, but other things changed too. Emily stopped asking how I was sleeping. She stopped asking if I had eaten. When she came over, she went straight to the small desk in the den where Helen used to sort envelopes. She opened drawers without asking. She took folders home and said she needed to scan them. She began using phrases that sounded rehearsed, like fixed income, asset management, estate efficiency, and protecting Dad from himself. Her husband, Mark, started showing up with her. Mark had always been the kind of man who smiled with his mouth but never with his eyes. He worked in sales, changed jobs every couple of years, and spoke about money as if everyone else simply lacked courage. He walked through my house slowly, studying the walls, the floors, the furniture. Once I caught him looking at the framed photo of Helen and me on our 35th anniversary, and he asked whether the frame was antique. Emily laughed like it was nothing. I did not. One Saturday morning, she brought over a stack of forms and told me we should simplify things. She wanted access to my retirement account, not just the checking account used for bills. She wanted to know whether Helen's life insurance had been deposited yet. She asked if I had updated my will. She asked whether the house would pass directly to her or through probate. She said these things while sitting in Helen's chair, drinking coffee from Helen's mug, wearing the expression of someone who had already divided the room in her mind. I told myself she was grieving differently. I told myself she was being practical because grief scared her, but But the strange signs kept gathering. My grocery card declined at the pharmacy. Emily said it was a bank error. A charity donation appeared on my statement, but the charity had a name I did not recognize and an address connected to one of Mark's business contacts. Emily said I must have forgotten approving it. Then a transfer of $800 went to an account labeled Household Support. I asked whose household it supported. Emily told me I was becoming suspicious. That word stayed with me. Suspicious. Not careful, not responsible, not alert, suspicious. It was the first time my daughter made me feel guilty for protecting what Helen and I had spent a lifetime building. It was also the first time I wondered whether I was not losing track of my finances. Maybe I was finally seeing them clearly. The humiliation happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of cold gray day when the sky above Pittsburgh looks like wet concrete. Emily had invited my sister Ruth, my nephew Brian, and a couple of neighbors over because she said we needed to have a family conversation. I did not know she had invited them until cars started pulling into the driveway. She had arranged my living room like a meeting. Chairs faced the sofa. A folder sat on the coffee table. Mark stood near the fireplace with his arms crossed, acting like a security guard for money that was not his. I remember looking at Helen's photograph on the mantel and feeling something tighten inside me. Emily began softly. She said she was worried about me. She said I had been forgetting things. She mentioned the late bills, but not the fact that she had been handling them. She mentioned the pharmacy card decline, but not the strange transfers. She told everyone she had stepped in because I was overwhelmed and pride could be dangerous at my age. I sat there listening to my own daughter build a case against me out of problems she had created. Ruth looked confused. Brian looked uncomfortable. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, reached for my hand, but Emily kept talking. She said I needed structure. She said finances were complicated now. She said online banking was not like the old days, when people balanced checkbooks by hand. Mark added that scams against seniors were everywhere, and sometimes family had to make hard decisions before it was too late. Those words made me feel less like a father and more like a leaking roof. Then Emily picked up the folder and placed it in my lap. Inside were forms granting her broader financial authority. Not temporary help, not bill organization, real control. She had highlighted the signature lines in yellow. I asked her why we were discussing my private finances in front of neighbors. Her face changed, the softness disappeared. She glanced at Mark, then back at me, and said the sentence that turned my grief into something colder. Dad, you're too old to understand money. Just let me handle what's left. What's left, not what you and Mom saved, not what you earned, not what you need to live. What's left. The room went silent in that embarrassed way. People go silent when cruelty arrives dressed as concern. Ruth whispered Emily's name, but Emily ignored her. Mark looked at the floor with a small, satisfied smile. My daughter leaned closer and told me I was making this harder than it needed to be. I looked at her hands. I remembered those same hands, small and sticky, with grape jelly when she was 5. I remembered teaching her how to ride a bicycle in the school parking lot, running behind her until my lungs burned. I remembered staying up past midnight, helping her build a science project that she forgot to mention until the night before it was due. I remembered Helen crying quietly in the kitchen, the year Emily stopped coming home for Thanksgiving because Mark's family had a bigger house. I wanted to ask when my daughter had started seeing me as an account balance. I wanted to ask whether she heard her mother's voice anywhere in that room. I wanted to ask if she understood that the money she called what's left was made of missed vacations, overtime, careful meals, old cars, patched roofs, and 2 people who gave her the best parts of themselves without keeping receipts. But I did not ask. I placed the folder back on the coffee table. My hands were steady. My voice when I spoke was quiet enough that everyone had to lean in. I told Emily I would think about it. She smiled because she thought she had won. She did not know that the night before, I had printed the first statement. After that Sunday, I stopped explaining myself. Emily had mistaken my grief for weakness, and Mark had mistaken my age for ignorance. That was useful. People who underestimate you rarely cover their tracks well. I began with paper. Helen had taught me that computers were convenient, but paper was patient. I requested mailed statements from the bank. I asked for printed copies of the last 6 months of activity. I bought a small lockbox from the hardware store and kept it in the bottom drawer of my dresser under folded winter sweaters. Every envelope went inside, every receipt, every notice, every letter from the utility companies, every page that did not make sense. Then I began writing things down, dates, times, amounts, Emily's explanations, Mark's visits, the names attached to transfers, the bills that were late even though Emily said she had paid them. I used Helen's old recipe notebook because it was the only notebook I had nearby the first day I started. For a while it hurt to write evidence on pages that smelled faintly of cinnamon and vanilla. And then it began to feel right. Helen had organized our life in that house. Now her notebook was helping me defend it. I did not confront Emily. I let her continue when she called me forgetful. I asked her to remind me. When she said she needed another password, I told her I would look for it. When Mark suggested I consider selling the house before maintenance became too much, I nodded and said old houses did require care. They thought I was drifting towards surrender. Instead, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my bank. I asked to speak with someone in person, not through a call center. The second was to our old attorney, Charles Whitaker, who had helped Helen and me draft our wills after I retired. The third was to Ruth. I did not tell my sister everything. I only asked whether she still had copies of the letters Helen sent her during the last months of her illness. Ruth said she had kept everyone. 2 days later, I drove to the bank without telling Emily. I wore the navy coat Helen used to say made me look like a principal. The branch manager, a man named Marcus Reed, greeted me with the professional kindness people use when they do not yet know whether someone is in trouble. And I explained that I needed a full review of all accounts connected to my name. His expression sharpened. He did not rush. He did not talk down to me. He printed records, highlighted transfers, and asked careful questions. Some withdrawals had gone to Emily's personal account. Others had gone to Mark's business account. One payment had gone to a luxury travel company. Another had paid a credit card, registered under Emily's name. The amounts were small enough to hide at first, then larger. Once she believed I was not watching. The worst one was labeled medical support reimbursement. It was not for my medical support. It had paid for a weekend spa package at a resort in the Poconos. I sat across from Marcus Reed while the printer hummed behind him, and something inside me went very still. Anger did not come first. Grief did. I thought of Helen counting coupons at the kitchen table. I thought of her selling her mother's bracelet for Emily's wedding. I thought of my daughter using the word support while taking money from the man who had supported her all his life. Marcus asked whether I had authorized those transfers. I said no. That was the moment the story changed. The hidden truth did not arrive as one great revelation. It came in pieces like broken glass swept into a pile. Marcus froze my daughter's online access before I left the bank. He explained the process clearly, printed a fraud dispute packet, and advised me to speak with my attorney before contacting Emily. He also told me something I had not known 2 weeks earlier. Emily had called the bank and asked about converting my individual checking account into a joint account. She had said I was becoming confused and that she needed to protect me from missed payments. The bank refused because I had not signed anything in person. Then Marcus showed me the notes attached to the call. Emily had asked whether a doctor's letter would be enough. She had asked whether a daughter could override a parent's hesitation if the parent was elderly. She had asked whether life insurance proceeds could be moved into a managed family account. Each question was careful. Each question had a purpose. When I met Charles Whitaker the next morning, he read the bank records without interrupting. Charles was 80 himself, thin as a fence post, with white hair and a voice that still made careless people sit up straight. He had known Helen for 20 years when he saw her name on the life insurance documents. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Then he opened our estate file. Helen and I had updated our wills after her diagnosis. I remembered signing the papers. But I had forgotten one detail because at the time my mind was full of hospital rooms and medication schedules. Helen had added a letter of intent. It was not legally binding in the same way a will was, but Charles had kept it with the file because she insisted. He slid a copy across the desk to me. Helen's handwriting was steady even then. She wrote that our savings were meant first to protect the surviving spouse. She wrote that no inheritance should ever come before dignity. She wrote that Emily had become too influenced by Mark's appetite for status, and that I, because I loved our daughter deeply, might be tempted to excuse behavior that should not be excused. The final line cut me more deeply than the bank records. Robert, love her if you can, but do not let her spend the rest of your life before you have lived it. I read that sentence 3 times. Charles then showed me another protection Helen had requested. My retirement account beneficiary structure had been changed. Emily was not removed entirely, because Helen could never fully shut the door on her child, but her inheritance was conditional. Any proven financial exploitation, coercion, or misuse of access could reduce or eliminate her share. At the time, I had thought the clause was unnecessary. Helen had squeezed my hand and told me protections were not accusations. They were seatbelts. You hoped not to need them, but you were foolish not to wear them. My wife had seen more than I had. The next piece came from Ruth. She brought over a shoebox of letters Helen had sent during treatment in one. Helen wrote that Emily had asked how much the house was worth while sitting beside her hospital bed. In another, Helen wrote that Mark had joked about early inheritance and then laughed when no one else did. Ruth had not shown me those letters before because she did not want to burden me while Helen was dying. I did not blame her. Grief hides many things. By the end of that week, we had bank records, transfer histories, utility notices, Emily's emails, Mark's messages, attorney notes, and Helen's letters. The truth was no longer a feeling in my chest. It had dates, numbers, names, and signatures. Still, I did not call Emily. Charles said we needed one more thing. We needed to let her reveal intent clearly enough that she could not later call everything a misunderstanding. Hurt to agree to that. A father does not want to watch his child walk deeper into wrongdoing. But Helen's sentence stayed with me. Do not let her spend the rest of your life before you have lived it. And so I waited. And Emily, I was only a tired old man with no idea what money meant, kept going. Once Emily discovered her online access had stopped working, her kindness vanished completely, and she came to the house without calling. Mark drove, but he stayed in the car at first, engine running as if they were collecting something rather than visiting someone. Emily walked in using the key I had given her years ago for emergencies. She found me in the kitchen, making tea in Helen's kettle. Her face was flushed, and she was holding her phone like it had personally betrayed her. She said the bank had locked her out. She said I must have done something wrong. She said this was exactly why I could not manage things alone. I told her I had gone to the bank to review my accounts. She stared at me as if a chair had spoken. Then she became gentle again, too quickly. She said she was not angry, only worried. She said sudden changes in behavior could be signs of decline. She said Mark had a friend who knew a geriatric care coordinator. She said we should schedule an evaluation before things got worse. Before things got worse meant before I could stop her. The next week was a performance. Emily brought groceries but kept the receipt and used my card. Mark replaced the porch light and told Ruth that I had become unsafe on steps, though I had not asked him to fix anything. Emily called my doctor's office trying to discuss my memory, but the nurse refused without authorization. She left brochures on my kitchen counter for assisted living communities with names like Silver Pines and Meadow Ridge. She circled one that advertised financial management support. Then she began reaching out to family. She told cousins I was confused. She told Ruth I had accused her of stealing because I did not understand digital transfers. She told Brian I might be developing paranoia. And she told neighbors that grief had made me unstable. Each story had just enough truth around the edges to sound believable. I was grieving. I was older. I had been late on bills. I had become quieter. Emily took those facts, hollowed them out, and filled them with lies. Mark escalated differently. He talked about the house. He said the neighborhood was changing. He said older homeowners were vulnerable. He said I could sell while prices were good and move somewhere easier. He said Emily could manage the proceeds. He walked through my basement, tapping pipes and sighing at the furnace. He told me repairs would eat through my savings. The same man whose business account had received my money now stood in my house explaining financial responsibility. One evening, Emily placed a new document on the kitchen table. This one named her as Durable Power of Attorney. She said Charles Whiteacre was too old-fashioned and that she had found a more modern service online. She told me signing would avoid family conflict. She told me Helen would have wanted me protected. That was the closest I came to losing my temper, not because she lied about money, not because she insulted my mind, but because she put her mother's name in her mouth like a key and tried to unlock my surrender with it. I asked if I could read the document overnight. Emily relaxed. She thought I was giving in. She patted my shoulder in a way that made my skin crawl and told me I was doing the right thing. Mark came inside then and congratulated me like I had passed a test. And after they left, I photographed every page and sent it to Charles. His reply came early the next morning. The document was broad, dangerous, and written to give Emily control over nearly every asset I had. It also included language allowing her to move funds for my care, housing, comfort, or related family support. Charles said related family support was a hole big enough to drive a truck through, and he told me not to sign. Then he told me it was time. But Emily gave us one final gift before the confrontation. She sent a text message meant for Mark, but she sent it to me by mistake. The message said she needed me to sign before Ruth got in my head again, and once the accounts were consolidated, she could pay off the cards, settle Mark's business debt, and move me somewhere smaller before the house became a fight. She deleted it 30 seconds later, but I had already taken the screenshot. I chose Charles Whitaker's office for the confrontation because Emily had turned my living room into a courtroom once. I saw no reason to let her do it twice. I told her I was ready to discuss the power of attorney. She arrived early wearing a cream coat and carrying a leather folder. Mark came with her. Polished shoes, expensive watch, nervous smile. They expected a signature. They expected a tired father, a quiet attorney, and a smooth transfer of control dressed up as concern. They did not expect Marcus Reed from the bank to be sitting beside Charles. They did not expect Ruth. They did not expect Brian. They did not expect the stack of printed records already arranged on the conference table. Emily paused in the doorway. Mark's smile weakened. Charles invited them to sit. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which somehow made the room feel more dangerous. Emily asked why everyone was there. I told her this was a family conversation. I used the exact words she had used in my living room. No one smiled. Charles began with the power of attorney. He explained that I would not be signing it. He explained that the language was overly broad and financially unsafe. Emily interrupted and said she was only trying to protect me. Charles placed her mistaken text message on the table. The room went quiet as everyone read the words she had tried to erase. Once the accounts were consolidated, she could pay off the cards, settle Mark's business debt, and move me somewhere smaller. And Emily said it was taken out of context. Mark said nothing. Then Marcus opened the bank folder. He did not accuse, he documented. That was worse. He went transfer by transfer, date by date. And he showed the movement of funds from my account into Emily S. He showed payments connected to Mark's business. He showed the luxury travel charge. He showed the fake medical support reimbursement. He showed the notes from Emily's call asking how to convert my individual account into a joint account and whether a doctor's letter could help override my hesitation. Emily's face changed slowly. At first she looked offended, then cornered, then frightened. She said I had approved some of it. I asked her which part. She said I had always helped family. I said helping family was not the same as being harvested by it. She said she was under pressure. I said pressure did not turn theft into love. Mark finally spoke. He said everyone was exaggerating. He said money moved between families all the time. Marcus looked at him and stated that moving money with authorization was not the same as using limited bill access for personal expenses. Charles added that the matter could be pursued civilly and possibly criminally, and depending on the full review. That was when Marcus' confidence collapsed. Emily began crying, not the soft grief of a daughter who had hurt her father, but the panicked crying of someone watching consequences enter the room. She said she had planned to pay it back. Charles asked from what funds. She said Mark's business was about to turn around. Ruth made a sound then, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. I looked at my daughter across the table. I had imagined that moment many times. In some versions I shouted, in others I asked her why. But when the moment came, I felt very old and very clear. I opened Helen's letter. I did not read all of it. Some parts belonged only to me, but I read the line that mattered. Robert, love her if you can, but do not let her spend the rest of your life before you have lived it. Emily covered her mouth. For the first time, she looked less afraid of the bank records and more afraid of her mother's judgment. I told her that her mother had worked too hard for our savings to become her emergency fund. I told her the money was not what hurt the most. It was the performance, the living room meeting, the neighbors, the way she made my grief look like incompetence, the way she used concern as a costume and called control protection. Then I placed the Sunday folder in front of her, the one with the highlighted signature lines. I told her I would remember that day for the rest of my life, not because she wanted help with money, and not because she was struggling. I would remember it because she looked at the father who had paid for her childhood, her wedding, her emergencies, and her mistakes, and decided the best way to get more was to make everyone believe he was too old to understand what was being taken. Emily whispered that she was sorry. I believed she was sorry to be exposed. I did not yet know if she was sorry to have done it. Charles then explained the terms. Emily's access to all accounts was permanently revoked. A formal repayment demand would be issued. The estate documents would be amended according to the protection clause Helen had requested. Emily would be removed as executor, removed from financial authority, and her inheritance would be placed under strict conditions if it remained at all. Mark was to have no contact with my finances, my home, or my legal affairs. Ruth sat beside me and cried quietly. Brian stared at Emily like he was seeing a stranger. The meeting ended without shouting. That mattered to me. I did not want a scene. Emily had already made one. I wanted a record. As we left, as she reached for my sleeve, I stepped back. Her hand stayed in the air for a second, and then fell. That small movement felt like the sound of a door closing. Consequences did not arrive all at once. They came in the slow, steady way truth moves when paperwork is stronger than excuses. The bank completed its investigation. Emily was required to return the unauthorized transfers. Some amounts came from selling jewelry. Some came from a loan her in-laws refused to discuss publicly. Mark's business account was flagged in the review, and the pressure exposed what Emily had been trying to hide. His business was not on the edge of a turnaround, it was sinking. Credit cards were maxed out. Vendor payments were late. The polished watch, the confident speeches, the talk about investments and courage had all been theater. Charles sent formal letters. My estate documents were amended. Emily was removed as executor. Her conditional inheritance was reduced and placed behind a repayment and accountability clause if she challenged the estate. The remaining share could be forfeited. Charles said Helen's seatbelt clause had been written exactly for this kind of road. I changed banks for one account and tightened protections on the rest. Marcus helped set up alerts that came directly to me and Ruth. My bills went back to paper and automatic payment through accounts no one else could touch. I changed the locks. And not because Emily had threatened me physically, but because a key is a form of trust and she had spent hers. The family learned the truth in pieces. Ruth did not gossip, but she also did not lie for Emily. And when cousins called, she told them the matter was serious and documented. Brian stopped inviting Emily and Mark to family dinners. Mrs. Alvarez, who had been in my living room the day Emily humiliated me, and brought over soup and apologized for not speaking up sooner. I told her cruelty can stun decent people into silence. I knew that better than anyone. Emily tried to repair her image before she tried to repair her actions. And she told relatives that I had misunderstood. Then she said Mark had pressured her. Then she said grief had made her unstable. Each explanation placed responsibility somewhere near her, but never fully in her hands. Mark blamed Emily. Emily blamed stress. Stress apparently had learned how to log into bank portals, transfer money, call financial institutions, and prepare power of attorney forms. And their marriage cracked under the weight of exposure. Without my money quietly filling holes, Mark's business folded within months. Their house went on the market. The trips stopped. The social media photos vanished. Emily took a job at an insurance office and moved into a smaller apartment after separating from Mark. I heard this from Ruth, not from Emily. Then came the phone calls. At first, I did not answer. Emily left messages that began with explanations and ended with tears. She said she never meant to hurt me. She said everything got out of control. And she said she missed Mom. She said Mark had made her feel like failure was unacceptable. She said she was ashamed. I listened to every message once, then I saved them, not as evidence this time, as reminders. 3 months after the confrontation, Emily came to my porch alone. No cream coat, no leather folder, no mark in the driveway. She looked thinner, tired, human in a way she had not allowed herself to look in years. And she said she had started counseling. She said she had repaid the first portion of the money. She said she understood if I never trusted her again. Then she said something that finally sounded like truth. And she said she had wanted control because she felt powerless, and taking from me had been easier than admitting her life was falling apart. I did not invite her inside. That may sound cruel to some people. It was not. The porch was as far as trust could honestly go that day. I stood with the screen door between us and told my daughter I loved her. I told her love had never been the problem. And the problem was that she had treated love like a bank she could rob and still expect to be welcomed at the counter, she cried. I cried too after she left, but I did not open the door. And the price Emily paid was not only money, it was access, it was reputation. It was the loss of the easy closeness she had assumed would always be waiting after betrayal. It was learning that a father's forgiveness might remain possible. But his protection of himself was no longer negotiable. By winter, the records were settled, the repayment plan was in writing, and my finances were safe. I had not destroyed my daughter, and I had simply stopped allowing her to destroy me the first morning. I balanced my own checkbook again. I sat at Helen's kitchen table with a sharpened pencil, a cup of black coffee, and the old calculator she used to keep in the drawer beside the stamps. Sunlight came through the window and touched the place where her hands had rested thousands of times for a moment. I could almost see her there, reading glasses low on her nose, telling me that numbers were not frightening if you respected them. I went line by line: electric, water, insurance, groceries, pension deposit, savings transfer. Nothing missing, nothing strange, nothing hidden behind words like support or reimbursement. It was ordinary, and that ordinariness felt like a blessing. People think betrayal ends when the guilty person is exposed. It does not. Exposure is only the first clean cut. Healing is what happens afterwards, slowly, in the rooms where the betrayal occurred. And I had to learn how to sit in my own living room without hearing Emily's voice telling people I was too old to understand money. I had to learn how to open bank statements without feeling sick. And I had to learn how to look at my daughter's childhood photos without letting the woman she became erase the child she had been. Some days I failed. There were mornings when anger came before coffee, and there were nights when I lay awake wondering if Helen would have handled it better. Then I would remember her letter: love her if you can, but do not let her spend the rest of your life before you have lived it. And Helen had not asked me to become hard. She had asked me to remain whole, so I began building a quieter life. Ruth came every Wednesday for lunch. She brought too much food and pretended it was accidental. Mrs. Alvarez started sending her grandson over to help with leaves, though I was still perfectly capable of using a rake. Brian visited on Sundays and fixed the loose railing on the porch, refusing payment. Because he said family should sometimes repair what other family damaged in the spring, I planted tomatoes again. Helen had always grown them better than I did. But I tried. I bought the same wooden stakes, the same twine, the same little paper markers she used to press into the soil. When the first green fruit appeared, I stood in the garden longer than necessary, and feeling foolish and grateful. Charles helped me set up a small local fund in Helen's name. It was not grand, it did not make newspapers. It helped older widows and widowers pay for 1 or 2 sessions with an attorney or financial advisor before signing documents they did not understand, the Helen Ellis Dignity Fund, and Charles called it. I thought Helen would have rolled her eyes at having her name on anything, then secretly kept every thank you note in a shoebox. The first person the fund helped was a retired nurse whose nephew wanted her to sign over control of her condo. The second was a man whose son had been using his debit card when Charles told me. I went home and sat quietly for a long time. Pain is terrible when it is wasted, but when pain becomes a warning light for someone else, it gains a purpose you can live with. Emily kept her repayment plan. That mattered. Not enough to fix everything, but enough to begin something honest. She sent checks every month with no notes at first. Then one day, a letter came. She wrote that counseling had made her understand how easily fear had turned into entitlement. She wrote that Mark's approval had become more important to her than her own conscience. She wrote that she had used my age as an excuse because admitting my clarity would have made her actions unforgivable. She wrote that she missed her mother and did not know how to face the fact that Helen had seen the truth before anyone else. At the end, she wrote that she did not expect to be invited back into my life quickly, but she hoped to earn the right to sit across from me one day. Without needing anything, I read that sentence several times. Without needing anything. That was the first sentence from Emily in years that sounded like a daughter instead of a demand. I did not call her that day. I folded the letter and placed it in Helen's recipe notebook, between banana bread and chicken soup. A month later, I wrote back. I told Emily that repayment was not the same as repair, but it was a start. I told her I was safe. I told her I was not bitter. Because bitterness would let the worst thing she had done live rent-free in the years I had left. I told her honesty would matter more than apologies now. I did not invite her for dinner. Not yet. Boundaries are not walls built from hatred. Sometimes they are fences around a garden that is trying to grow back on Helen's birthday. I drove to the cemetery with fresh flowers and a copy of the first thank you note from the Dignity Fund. I sat beside her grave and read it aloud. The wind moved through the trees the way it used to move through the maple in our front yard. I told her about the tomatoes. I told her Ruth still overcooked chicken. I told her Emily was trying. And I was trying too, but trying did not mean pretending nothing had happened. Before I left, I thanked her for the seatbelt. That evening, I came home and made soup from one of her recipes and ate at the kitchen table with the bank statement folded neatly beside me. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty in the same way. It felt protected. It felt honest. It felt like mine again. I still loved my daughter. That is the part some people do not understand. Love does not disappear just because trust is broken. But love changed shape. It became less like an open door and more like a lamp in the window. It could guide someone home, but it would not remove the lock. Months later, Emily and I met at a small diner halfway between our homes. I chose the place because it was public, simple, and neutral. She arrived early. She did not bring papers. She did not bring Mark. She did not bring excuses for the first 10 minutes. We talked about the weather, Ruth's health, and the Steelers. Then she cried quietly into a paper napkin and said she was sorry for making me feel small. That was the apology I had been waiting for. Not sorry for the money, not sorry for the consequences, sorry for making me feel small. I told her that I was not ready for Sunday dinners. I was not ready to give her a key. I was not ready to pretend I did not still check every account twice, but I was willing to have coffee again. Her face crumpled with relief. It was not forgiveness in full. It was not restoration. It was a first board laid across a broken bridge. When I returned home, I stood in the hallway and looked at Helen's photograph. She was smiling in the picture caught mid-loft, one hand raised as if telling me not to make a fuss. I thought about all the years we had spent building a life that our daughter nearly turned into a withdrawal slip. Then I thought about the fund, the garden, the quiet mornings, the locks I controlled, the bills paid on time, the dignity I had taken back without shouting. I had not won by being cruel. I had won by paying attention. I had won by keeping records. I had won by trusting the woman who knew me best, and by finally understanding that age does not make a man helpless. Grief does not make him foolish. Kindness does not make him available for use. That night, I placed Helen's recipe notebook back in the drawer. I checked the front door. I turned off the kitchen light. Then I stood for a moment in the dark, listening to the old house settle around me. It was the same house where Emily had learned to walk, where Helen had baked birthday cakes, where bills had been paid carefully, where love had been given freely. But now it was also the house where I learned one of the hardest lessons of my life. Family can inherit your eyes, your name and your memories. They do not inherit the right to take your dignity. And as I went upstairs to bed, with my accounts safe, my doors locked, and my wife's last words resting in the drawer below, I finally understood that what was left was not just money. And what was left was my life, and this time I was the one who would decide how to spend it.